So, how did this all start? Well, it began with a woman named Amelia. She was a widow. Her husband, who was in the military, had passed away. She had 2 young kids, a lively little boy named Daniel, who was about 4 years old, and a baby girl named Mia, who was just learning to walk. I met them through a friend, and it was clear from the start that Amelia was having a really hard time. Sure, she was grieving, but it was more than that. She was completely worn out. Like, you could see it in her face, in the way she moved, in the tiredness in her eyes. It wasn't just regular tiredness. It was the kind of deep exhaustion that comes from carrying way too much on your shoulders. I didn't step in because I felt like I had to or because I wanted to play the hero. It wasn't like that at all. I just saw her, really saw her. I saw how much she was struggling, and I wanted to help. I wanted to make life a little easier for her and those kids. I felt this strong pull to be there for them, to give them some stability and support. At first, it was small things like watching the kids so she could rest or helping out with errands. But over time, it became more than that. I started to feel like I could be a father figure to those kids. Their dad was gone, and I wanted to be there for them, not to take his place, but to give them the love and care every kid should have. I guess you could say I was living out my own values, things like hard work, responsibility, and loyalty. I wanted to give them what their dad couldn't, not because I felt forced to, but because I truly wanted to. It just felt right, like the beginning of something meaningful. And for a long time, it was good. I really gave it my all. I worked long hours not just to cover the basics, but to make sure those kids had everything they needed: good schools, nice clothes, a safe home, and plenty of food. I made their well-being my top priority, even if it meant putting my own needs second. It wasn't just about making sure they had what they needed to get by. I wanted to make up for the fact that their dad wasn't there. I wanted to fill that gap, to make them feel safe, loved, and whole. It wasn't just about giving them stuff either. I was there for them in every way, emotionally too. I didn't miss a single school event, soccer game, or play. I was always in the front row, cheering the loudest, their biggest supporter. I threw birthday parties, planned family trips, and did all the things a dad would do. And they loved me for it. They started calling me Dad. Not just my name, Thomas, but Dad. And honestly, I believed it. I felt like the luckiest guy in the world. I thought I'd built this real, loving family. I was so wrapped up in the idea of it, so desperate for it to be true, that I didn't notice the problems creeping in. I was so focused on creating this perfect image that I ignored the little signs that things weren't as solid as I thought. Looking back now, I can see I was building on shaky ground. But at the time, I was all in. I gave it everything: my heart, my time, my energy. I was determined to be the best father figure I could be. And for a while, it seemed like it was working. We had our routines, our traditions, our little jokes. We felt like a family. I was convinced of it. That feeling is what kept me going. The first hints of trouble were small, easy to overlook. Little things like the kids making sarcastic comments, some eye-rolling, or a bit of backtalk. Nothing huge, nothing you wouldn't expect from kids growing up. I told myself it was just normal teenage behavior, a phase they'd outgrow. I didn't want to see it as anything more serious. I remember one time Daniel, he was probably 13 or 14, made a snarky comment about how I wasn't cool because I wouldn't let him stay out late. Mia, who was a bit younger, jumped in with something equally rude. It hurt a little, but I just laughed it off. I convinced myself they were just testing me, pushing boundaries like all kids do at that age. As the kids grew older, their disrespect became more obvious. By the time Daniel turned 17, he was deep into his teenage years. He started blowing off curfews, brushing aside any advice I gave him, and acting like he had the right to do whatever he pleased. I guess it was typical teenage rebellion, but it felt harsher, like there was a mean streak to it that I couldn't overlook. Mia, who was about 14 at the time, began copying her brother's attitude. She'd roll her eyes, ignore what I told her, and act like my concerns didn't matter. It was like they teamed up against me, showing they didn't respect my authority, or even me, really. They were pushing boundaries, seeing how much they could get away with. What made it harder was Amelia's response, or lack of it. She wouldn't step in or support me. She'd just sit there, usually glued to her phone, acting like she didn't see what was happening. Sometimes, she'd even subtly side with them. She'd act distracted or sigh like I was the one overreacting. It wasn't just her being passive. It felt like she was quietly encouraging their behavior. She'd always make excuses for them. They're just tired, or it's just a phase, or we need to keep the peace. But really, she was letting them disrespect me. And in doing so, she was chipping away at my authority and leaving me feeling more and more alone. I began to feel like I was the only one who cared about setting rules or teaching them right from wrong. I started wondering about Amelia's intentions. Was she really that clueless? Or was she purposely undermining me? Around this time, I had my first real moment of clarity, but I still didn't fully understand what was going on. The final straw came one night when Daniel came home hours past his curfew. He hadn't called or texted, and I was really worried. But when he finally walked in, he acted like it was nothing. I asked him calmly where he'd been. I just wanted some accountability. He didn't even look at me. He just said, "Relax. I'm not a kid." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a cold brush off. Then he added, "You're not my real dad. Stop acting like you own me." Felt like a punch to the gut. All those years of love, care, and support were thrown right back in my face. That was the moment everything started to fall apart. Mia, who was standing there, jumped in and said, "Yeah, you're just some guy Mom married. Like all the years we'd spent together, all the memories we'd shared, didn't mean a thing." Something inside me just shattered. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was more like this deep, crushing disappointment. And the worst part? Amelia didn't say a word. She just stood there, silent. Her silence felt like the ultimate betrayal. It was like she was confirming everything I'd started to suspect. That I was just a convenience to them. Someone to handle the things their real dad couldn't. That was the moment I realized the family I thought I'd built wasn't real. Not long after that, it happened again. This time, it was Mia. She'd made a mess in the kitchen, and I asked her to clean it up. Seemed simple enough, right? Just basic responsibility. But instead of doing it, she looked at me and said, "Why don't you do it? It's your house, isn't it?" That hurt. It wasn't just the disrespect. It was the way she said it, like I was some kind of servant, like my only job was to clean up after them. It was a reminder that I didn't really belong, that I was just there to provide and take care of things. It felt like she was trying to put me in my place, to make me feel small. Then, as if on cue, Daniel jumped in with the same line, "You're not even our real dad." It was like they were teaming up, hammering home the message that I didn't really matter to them. But what really hit me was Amelia's reaction. She didn't yell or get mad. She just glanced at me, barely looking up from her phone, and said, "They have a point, Thomas. Maybe you should back off." That was it. That was the moment I knew it was over. It wasn't just that the kids were being disrespectful anymore. It was that Amelia was openly agreeing with them. She was taking their side against me, the person who had spent years looking after them. This wasn't about anger or even feeling hurt, not really. It was like a light bulb went off. I finally saw things clearly. I was done. There was no fixing this. What I thought was a family wasn't real, it was all a lie, and I was ready to walk away for good. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was quiet, like finally accepting a truth I'd been avoiding. I stopped trying to hold on to something that wasn't there. I let go. And for the first time, I did something I never thought I'd do. I stopped. I stopped giving, stopped caring, stopped trying. It wasn't a rash decision. It was something I thought about carefully. I just pulled back. No more rides, no more money, no more looking out for them, no more advice, no more worrying. I let them deal with the results of their own choices. It was a total change from how I'd been for years. I'd always been there for them, no matter what. But now, I was done. It wasn't easy. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. Everything in me wanted to keep trying, to keep fixing things. I put so much of myself into this family, and walking away was painful. But I knew I had to do it, for my own sake. I knew it wouldn't be simple. I knew they'd push back, that they'd try to get to me, but I was ready for it. I'd hit my breaking point. I'd given them everything, and they'd thrown it all back in my face. I wasn't going to be their doormat anymore. First, they laughed. They made fun of me, threw sarcastic comments my way, and smirked whenever they saw me. They thought they'd won. They thought they didn't need me. They figured Amelia could handle everything I'd been doing for them. But they were wrong. They'd tease me, imitating the way I used to set rules, saying things like, "Oh no, are we breaking the rules now?" In this exaggerated, mocking tone, rolling their eyes and smirking at each other. It was like they were trying to get under my skin, to make me react. But I didn't. I was done playing their game. Amelia? Oh, she stepped right in to cover for me. She paid for their little shopping sprees, made sure their weekends were still packed with fast food and pointless spending. She kept them comfortable, kept them feeling smug, and kept pushing the idea that they didn't need me. But I knew it wouldn't last. Amelia didn't have the kind of money I did. Her income wasn't enough to keep up that lifestyle forever. So I stayed quiet. I let them have their fun, let them think they were winning. I knew the truth would hit them eventually. I didn't argue. I didn't react. I just watched and waited, knowing it was only a matter of time. It was a weird kind of patience, but I was sure I was right. Their confidence was built on shaky ground, and I knew it wouldn't hold. I just had to wait for it to fall apart. And then, little by little, things started to shift. The shopping trips slowed down. The fast food runs became rare. New clothes stopped showing up. At first, it was small stuff, but it was noticeable. Then, bigger issues popped up. School fees became a problem. Daniel got into trouble at school, and Amelia didn't know what to do. Mia broke her phone, and there was no money to fix it. I remember the first time Daniel missed the ride I used to give him to school. He'd always taken it for granted, never even saying thanks most of the time. Now he was on his own. He had to run for the bus, and from what I heard, he barely made it, out of breath and panicked. It's a small thing, sure, but it meant something. It was the first sign that their easy life was starting to crack. And yeah, I'll admit, I felt a little satisfaction. Not happiness exactly, but a quiet sense of being right. I knew what it was like to struggle, to work hard for everything. I'd been there when I was younger, scraping by to make ends meet. They, on the other hand, had always had everything handed to them. I didn't say a word, though. I just watched. I saw Mia's frustration when she realized her broken phone wasn't going to be replaced. I heard her complaining to Amelia, and I heard Amelia's excuses getting weaker and weaker. She was running out of money, and she was starting to realize she couldn't give them everything I had. That same day, Mia completely lost it, complaining loudly about how unfair it was that she couldn't get her phone fixed. Amelia, in a quiet, almost hesitant voice, finally confessed that she didn't have the money to fix it right then. It was a small thing to admit, but it meant a lot. It was the first time she openly acknowledged that they were struggling. It was like the first crack in the wall of denial they'd been living in. The reality of their situation was starting to hit them. They were beginning to realize that the comfortable life they'd been living had depended on me, the person they'd taken for granted and treated poorly. The easy days were over, and they were starting to feel the consequences. It was a tough realization, but one they needed to face. My absence was making a big impact. Not long after the phone incident, Amelia finally confronted me. She was furious, of course. She called me childish and said I was shirking my responsibilities. That word, responsibilities, really stuck with me. It showed how she saw me, not as a partner or a father figure, but as someone whose only role was to provide for them, like a human ATM. She kept going, blaming me for everything that was falling apart. She said I was abandoning them, being selfish, and not acting like a real man. She tried to make me feel guilty, like I was the one in the wrong. But it was all her own stuff being projected onto me. She was trying to shift the blame for her own mistakes. I let her vent. I let her say everything she needed to say. And when she finally stopped to catch her breath, I asked her one simple question. Why had she never stood up for me? Why had she always taken the kids' side, even when they were disrespectful? Why had she let them treat me so poorly? And that's when it all came out. That's when the truth finally surfaced. She sneered, like, really sneered, and said, "Because I agree with them, Thomas. You were never really their father." It felt like a punch to the gut, but at the same time it confirmed everything I'd already guessed. But she didn't stop there. She actually admitted that she'd told the kids not to let me control them. "I told them not to let you control them," she said. "I raised them alone before you, and I can do it again." That was the part that really stung. It wasn't just that she hadn't stood up for me. She'd actively encouraged them to disrespect me. She'd been poisoning their minds against me all along. Daniel and Mia were standing in the hallway, watching the whole thing with their arms crossed and these smug little looks on their faces. It was like they were enjoying the drama. And in that moment, it hit me. This is who they really are. Not the sweet, innocent kids I tried so hard to love and care for, but spoiled, entitled brats who'd been enabled by their manipulative mother. As much as it hurt, I also felt this weird sense of relief. It was over. The act was done. I had my answer. There was no more guessing, no more wondering. I knew, without a doubt, that walking away had been the right choice. The truth was brutal, but it was also freeing. I was finally done. But things didn't get better right away, they actually got worse. The kids, fueled by Amelia's anger and their own sense of entitlement, started acting out even more. Started small, my stuff would go missing. Then, some important work files disappeared from my computer. I had a feeling they were messing with me, but I couldn't prove it. Then it escalated. One morning, I found my car keyed. A long, deep scratch down the side. That's when I knew I had to take action. I installed security cameras quietly inside and around the house. I didn't tell anyone, not even Amelia. I just wanted proof. And I got it. A few days later, I caught them on camera. Daniel and Mia, in my closet, laughing as they tore up my clothes with scissors. It was intentional, straight-up vandalism. I didn't confront them. I didn't yell or lose my temper. I stayed calm and collected. I documented everything. Saved the video footage, took photos of the damage, and kept all the nasty texts they'd sent me. I was playing the long game, letting them think they were winning while I quietly prepared to leave for good. I knew I had to protect myself. Not just emotionally, but legally too. I could tell things were going to get messy, and I wanted to be ready. I started gathering everything I might need to defend myself if it came to that. It was a tough and depressing situation, but I was determined to handle it with as much grace and strength as I could. I wasn't going to sink to their level. I was going to stay calm, think things through, and keep quiet. The next thing I did was talk to a lawyer. I laid out the whole situation and showed him all the evidence I'd collected. He listened carefully, nodding here and there, and when I was done, he told me I had a solid case. We talked about divorce, and he even brought up the idea of a restraining order because of how hostile the kids were getting. I also filed a police report about the property damage. It felt weird reporting my stepkids to the police, but I knew it had to be done. I needed to have an official record of what was happening to protect myself from any future problems. It was another step in cutting ties and getting myself out of this toxic mess. Then, one afternoon while Amelia and the kids were gone, I packed a bag. I didn't take much, just the basics and the things that really meant something to me. I left everything else behind. The furniture, the appliances, all the stuff I'd collected over the years. None of that mattered. What mattered was my freedom and my peace of mind. I left an envelope on the kitchen counter with the divorce papers and copies of all the evidence. The police report, photos of the damage, and screenshots of the threatening messages. It was my way of making it official. There was no turning back. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. I got into my car, the one with the big scratch down the side, and drove away. I didn't have a clear plan, but I knew I had to get out of that toxic environment. The last step was dealing with the money. I closed all the joint accounts and cut off Amelia's access to my funds. It was a tough move, but it had to be done. I had to stop her from enabling the kids' bad behavior. I had to make it clear that the free ride was over. It was the final break, the last step in cutting ties. It was done. As expected, Amelia completely lost it. She blew up my phone with angry calls and voicemails, calling me a coward, saying I'd abandoned them, and accusing me of being a terrible person. She insisted she could handle things without me, that she didn't need my money, and that she'd be better off without me. But it was all just noise. She was in denial, refusing to face the reality of what was happening. I didn't pick up her calls or reply to her texts. I just blocked her number. I wasn't going to get dragged back into the drama. I said what I needed to say, made my stand, and that was it. It was time to focus on myself and start building a new life. Then the kids started messaging me. At first, it was the same old arrogant, casual tone they'd always used. But slowly, their messages started to change. They sounded worried, even sorry. They apologized for how they'd acted and admitted things were tough without my support. Finally, Mia, the younger one, sent me a message that just said, "I miss you." It was a big shift, but it didn't matter anymore. Too much had happened. The trust was gone, and I couldn't go back, even if I wanted to. I stayed quiet. I didn't respond. I could see they were sorry, but I stuck to my decision. I'd learned a hard lesson, and I wasn't going to make the same mistakes again. I'd given them everything I had, and they'd thrown it all back in my face. I was done. My silence was my answer. It was my way of saying, you made your choices, and now you have to live with them. So that's my story. It's not a happy one, but it's real. And I learned some important lessons from it. The biggest one: never let people take you for granted. Never beg for respect. Don't waste your time and energy on people who don't appreciate you. And if you're being used or disrespected, walk away. Don't hesitate. Don't look back. It's a tough lesson to learn, and even harder to act on. But it's crucial for your own well-being and self-respect. You deserve to be treated with kindness, respect, and love. And if you're not getting that, you have every right and even the responsibility to leave. Some people only realize how much you matter once you're gone. And by then, it's too late. It's a sad reality, but it's the truth. Don't wait for them to figure out your worth. Know your own worth and act on it. It's not about being selfish. It's about being aware of what you deserve. It's about protecting your heart, your mind, and your peace. Thanks for listening. I hope my story helps someone out there who might be going through something similar. Remember, you're not alone, and you deserve happiness. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Choose yourself. Always.